Wanderer of the Wasteland, Chapter 12, Part 3. While Adam sat beside the fire, motionless, pondering with slow, painful amaze over what he had just heard, Dismukes prepared for his night's rest. He unrolled a pack, spread a ragged old canvas, folded a blanket upon it, and arranged another blanket to pull up over him, together with the end of the canvas. For a pillow, he utilized an old coat that lay on his pack. His sole concession to man's custom of undressing for bed was the removal of his old slouch hat. Then with slow, labored movement, he lay down to stretch his huge body and pull the coverlets over him. From his cavernous breast heaved a long, deep sigh. His big eyes, dark and staring, gazed up at brightening stars, and then they closed. Adam felt tempted to pack and move on to a quiet and lonely place off in the desert where he could think without annoyance. Keen and bitterly fateful as had been his memory, it had long ceased to revive thoughts of Collishaw, the relentless sheriff and ally of Gerd. How strange and poignant had been the shock of recollection, had been the blow Adam had dealt, the savage fling of his gun in Collishaw's face that had destroyed his eye and caused a hideous disfigurement. And the Texan, with that fatality characteristic of his kind, was ever on the lookout for the man who had ruined his eyesight. Perhaps that was only one reason for this thirst for revenge. Gerd, had Collishaw not sworn to hang Adam? "You'll swing for this," he had yelled in his cold, ringing voice of passion. And so Adam lived over again the old agony, new and strange in its bitter mockery, its vain hope of forgetfulness. Vast as the desert was, it seemed small now to Adam, for there wandered over it a relentless and bloodthirsty Texan hunting to kill him. The past was not dead. The present and the future could not be wholly consecrated to atonement. A specter, weird and grotesque as a yucca tree, loomed out there in the shadows of the desert night. Death stalked on Adam's trail. The hatred of men was beyond power to understand. Work, fame, use, health, love, home, life itself could be sacrificed by some men just to kill a rival or an enemy. Adam remembered that Collishaw had hated him and loved Gerd. Moreover, Collishaw had that strange instinct to kill men, a passion which grew by what it fed on, a morbid mental twist that drove him to rid himself of the terrible, haunting ghost of his last victim by killing a new one. Added to that was a certain leaning toward the notorious. "We'll meet someday," soliloquized Adam, "but he would never bother me." The comfort of that fact did not long abide in Adam's troubled mind. He would recognize Collishaw, and that seemed to hold something fatalistic and inevitable. "When I meet Collishaw, I'll tell him who I am, and I'll kill him." That fierce whisper was the desert voice in Adam, the desert spirit. He could no more help that sudden bursting flash of fire than he could help breathing. Nature in the desert did not teach men to meet a threat with forgiveness, nor to wait until they were struck. Instinct had precedence over intelligence and humanity. In the eternal strife to keep alive on the desert, a man who conquered must have assimilated something of the terrible nature of the stinging cholla cactus and the hard, grasping tenacity of the mesquite roots, and the ferocity of the wild cat, and the cruelty of the hawk. Something of the nature of all that survived. It was law. It forced a man to mete out violence in advance of that meant for him. To fight and to think were to be my blessings, soliloquized Adam, and he shook his head with a long familiar doubt. Then he had to remember that no blessings of any kind whatsoever could be his. Stern and terrible duty to himself. So he rolled in his blankets and stretched his long body to the composure of rest. Sleep didn't drop with soft swiftness upon his eaves as it had upon those of Dismukes. He had walked far, but he was not tired. He never tired any more. There seemed to be no task of a single day that could weary his strength. And for long he lay awake, listening to the deep breathing of his companion and the howl of the coyotes and the sounds of Tekopah, so unnatural in the quiet of the desert. A sadness weighed heavily upon Adam. At first he was glad to have met Dismukes, but now he was sorry. A tranquility, a veil seemed to have been rent. The years had not really changed the relation of his crime, nor materially the nature of his sin, but they had gradually, almost imperceptibly softened his ceaseless and eternal remorse. By this meeting with Dismukes, he found that time effaced shocks, blows, stains, just as it wore away the face of the desert rock. That too was a law, and in this Adam divined a blessing that he could not deny. Dismukes had unleashed a specter out of the dim glow of the past. 8 years. So many, and yet they were as 8 days. There were the bright stars, pitiless and cold, and the dark, bold mountains that had seemed part of his strength. In the deep blue sky above and in the black shadow below, Adam saw a white face, floating, fading, reappearing, mournful and accusing and appalling, a face partaking of the old boyish light and joy and of the godlike beauty of a perfect manhood, the haunting face of his brother Gerd. It haunted Adam, and the brand of Cain burned into his brain. The old resurging pains in his breast, the long sighs, the oppressed heart, the salt tears, the sleepless hours, these were Adam's again, as keen as in the first days of his awakening down on the Colorado desert, where from the peaks of the Chocolate Mountains he'd gazed with piercing eyes south to the peak of Picacho. That monument tower above his brother's grave. Someday I'll go back, whispered Adam, as if answering to an imperative and mysterious call. End of chapter 12, part 3.